everybody. This is going to be the 858 review pod. Before we jump into the show, we're going to split this into 2 episodes. So listen to this episode and then watch for the part 2, which is going to be all the social media questions and answers that we're going to run through. Before we jump to the show, too, real quick, I want to thank today's sponsor. The show is brought to you by Polaris. The wait is over. SnowCheck is here. It's your once-a-year chance to build and pre-order your dream mountain sled with exclusive factory customization and up to a 4-year warranty. Be the first to get your hands on new models like the Pro RMK, Chaos RMK, and now up to 7 pounds lighter with SnowCheck exclusive colors, customizations, and technology. Or check out the RMK SP that's easier to ride and even easier to own. Stop dreaming and start building. SnowCheck ends March 27th. Talk to your local Polaris dealer or start your build at Polaris.com. Also sponsoring the show is located in Big Sky, Montana, only 5 minutes away from Buck Ridge, Carrot Basin. 320 Guest Ranch offers lodging and accommodation for your next snowmobiling trip. Single cabins and large full cabins with kitchens available. 320 Guest Ranch is a great place to call home for your next adventure. Check it out at 320ranch.com. All right, on to the show. Welcome to the SnoWest Show. I'm Ryan Harris. This has been a long time in the making. This is probably our most anticipated show, I would say, to date. The Arctic Cat review stuff, man, it just goes crazy. I think Skidoo and Polaris riders are as interested in the Cat 858 as the Cat guys are, because they have to be. There can't be that many Cat people out there because the Cat stuff gets so much more hits than anything else we do. So today, we're going to do the Arctic Cat 2025 M858 Alpha 1 Mountain Cat review. This is our review pod. So with us here today, co-hosting, we have Justin Stevens. I'm gonna do a little more background on each of you. Yeah. Right off the bat, just because.
Have you been Googling us?
Oh boy,
you've been Googling us.
I Googled you, but.
Oh, jeez.
So Justin, we've said many times, former marketing director for Motorfist. Yep. You had some close ties with Arctic Cat there, leading into the buyout.
Yeah.
But you've owned an Arctic Cat, right?
Yeah, I had. I think I rode them for three or 4 years, maybe.
Yeah,
2 or 3.
And worked close with Rob and Dave, and went to Japan and filmed them. And
yeah, it was a lot of fun. So
Rhett Clark, you've been test riding with SnoWest for years. Also a former Arctic Cat owner, right?
Yes, I've owned them all. A couple M1000s, M8s. I have a kitty cat in my garage.
There you go.
Meow.
There you go. Bruce Kerbs. We don't really need to establish any bona fides on you with Arctic Cat.
Nope. I'm there.
He bleeds green.
Locked in.
You got the RR&D.
R&D.
There weren't that many of those shirts made.
No.
Riley, Rob, and Dave.
Yeah.
That was kind of a one-off shirt there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Bruce, you've been test riding with SnoWest. You came to Montreal, Quebec with us, rode the 2025 Skidoos, trail riding, all sorts of stuff there. But yeah, you've got an extensive history in Arctic Cat. You've got a few in your garage.
Yep.
You got a 19 Alpha 1. You got a 23 hardcore.
Yep.
So yeah, Mr. Arctic
Got a 120.
120.
You got a 400?
Got a 400.
Oh, you do? You bought Dave's old 400.
Yeah.
The Spider-Man one.
Yeah.
Spider-Man in there.
How's that thing run?
It's good. Boy loves it. It's a fun little sled. Dave screwed me on it, but it's cool. Just kidding, Dave.
Yeah, you're not getting any deals out of that. That's for sure. Did you see Tristan was doing downhill powder turns on Dave's driveway?
Yeah.
Sunday or Monday?
Yeah.
After the storm. And then Broc Genta, former Arctic Cat employee. So you were with Motorfist for a while. You were doing athlete management. You worked with Rob and Dave.
I was
what were you doing there?
I was doing sales for Motorfist as well as for Arctic Cat.
Okay.
I worked with Justin Stevens a little bit. That's how I got to know him. Sorry. And we're still acquaintances.
Yeah, and then from there, so from Motorfist you went on to Arctic Cat.
Yeah. Yep. I stayed with Motorfist and then went at the buyout, and then I moved on to working with Arctic Cat and started district sales manager there. Was able to go out to the headquarters several different times for meetings and touring all the factories, and so yeah, it was good.
Yep. Yeah, we're a bunch of guys that just ride snowmobiles. I mean, that's the crux of this podcast. But we do have a background with all the different brands. And, I used to race Arctic Cats back in high school, did snowcross, junior, novice, semi-pro for 4 or 5 years, raced Arctic Cats primarily, raced hill climb. 1 year on Arctic Cat with Brett Rasmussen back in 99, 2000, that season, did the Rimshaw circuit. But I just wanted to throw that all out there so everybody's not like, oh, you guys don't know because you never touch an Arctic Cat.
We ride them.
We spend a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And we've had the M600 Catalyst this year. Spent quite a bit of time on that. Bruce, you've got a lot of seat time on that.
Yeah.
That's as expected.
I was gonna say we didn't see that sled very much.
Well, I was in St. Anthony.
I'm just saying,
Close to you. You know where I live.
Yeah.
He racked up some miles. Like they were watching the miles. Like he put some miles on that thing.
It's a fun sled.
Yeah. So anyway, well, let's jump into the review here. So Arctic Cat came out with the 858. They announced it to the media a couple days before Heydays, and then they announced it to public at Heydays. It was a surprise. Everybody was expecting maybe something bigger or a turbo, but to be totally honest, Arctic Cat's not in a position to jump into the turbo game this soon with all of the Textron buyout. When a corporation comes in and buys out something like Arctic Cat, that sets everything back a year or two. And so to get the 858 out was a pretty awesome accomplishment. So normally media has a lot more seat time on the 25s than we did this year. Normally we're getting a ride in December, late December, and then into January, getting a couple opportunities, and then we can usually meet up with the crew from all the brands. This year was lower. Like we didn't get as much seat time across the board, mostly because of the snow, right? Like just kind of crappy snow. Arctic Cat canceled their media ride.
And then we had too much
January.
snow for the January.
Yeah. Yeah, so we went from canceling that media ride down to 0 snow and then started winter over again.
Yep.
So we went into this 858 ride not having any seat time on it before Snowshoot. And then Snowshoot came along, and what we have, 3 days on them?
3 days. Yeah.
And haven't had any time since on it. There are some opportunities I think we can line up with Cat to go get on them again as the season progresses. But just throwing that out there as well, it was a shorter test window for sure this year than we normally have. I generally like to have 5, 6, 7, 8 days on the snow on these things, but it just wasn't available. So let's dive in. First question: how does everybody feel about the 858 as a power plant, just as an NA? Like, how did it perform? Bruce, let's start with you.
Go, Bruce.
Like you say, it would have been nice to have some more seat time on. Hopefully, we do get some more. It's a new motor, new product for Arctic Cat. I feel like they still got some testing to do, but overall, each day we rode them. By Tuesday, me and Rhett was the only ones up there from this group, and it got better. I feel like the mid-range pulls pretty good, and top end. Honestly, I do think it needs some bottom end adjustment, whether that's in the clutching or tuning. But as far as an overall package, I think their chassis, I think they're on point with their chassis. Feels pretty good. Handles pretty good. A lot of people don't like the Alpha skid, but I think those people that ride the Alpha and have really bought into it. Me, myself, I've learned how to ride the Alpha. It does wash out a little bit, but I think it complements each other with that chassis versus the Ascender chassis. So overall, I feel like it's going to be a powerhouse, I guess you could say, but I feel like there's some more work that needs done on it, and hopefully by, fall delivery, they've got that dialed in. But so that's kind of my take on it.
Rhett, you also rode Tuesdays, so you rode the 146 package that the rest of us didn't get on.
Yep.
But that one seemed to run a little bit better.
Yeah. So we had all the different track lengths, all the 858s, multiple days. Tuesday, we had the 858 and the 146. As far as handling goes, it felt the most similar to the Catalyst 600. As far as the way it reacted and handled and weight transfer, all that stuff. So Motor-wise, they all felt similar. The ones that we rode those 3 days, like Bruce said, bottom end compared to Skidoo and Polaris wasn't quite as strong, but top end, mid-range to top end felt comparable. So
Yeah. And as far as, if there's questions in there, we'll probably get to it comparing to the 900. I feel like the 900 still has the edge on it. So whether that's Cat going to fix that through the summer, you know what I mean, to make it comparable. I feel like the 900's got the small edge on it still as far as power-wise.
Yeah, and for me, mostly it's all bottom end. Like the 858 just doesn't have the bottom end as the Polaris 850.
Yeah.
The Skidoo 850, and definitely not the Polaris 9R.
For sure.
But the 9R is kind of often in its own category. Like I think, yeah, everybody's going to compare the 858 to the 9R. That's the big comparison everybody wants.
Mm-hmm.
But the 9R, like, you got to understand, that thing is a total factory race sled. Like that was in development with Keith Curtis on the hill climb circuit, kind of derived from the Carl Cycle big bore.
Yeah.
So it's a different approach at more horsepower. It's a bigger bore for displacement. The 858 is a longer stroke for displacement. So those two engine platforms just operate totally different.
Yeah, that's true.
But the bottom end for me on the 858, just it wasn't there. It was pretty slow on the bottom. It's there. It's just not, compared to the other two, it's just not very quick to rev.
Yeah.
It's a slower revving. It felt like I told people it felt like a diesel a little bit. Tons of mid-range, strong top end, but the bottom end is just not zippy. And that's what I was really looking for, but going into a stroker setup on an engine, like, it's just not, you're not going to get that out of a stroke engine.
Yeah. And I think riding the 600, that 600 is pretty snappy on the bottom. So I think we're all anticipating that bottom end snappy from the 6 to transfer over to the 858.
But with more overall power.
A little more grunt. So I think our expectations were set here and they ended up here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Brock, what do you think?
Pretty much echoing everything that you guys just said. I mean, it does need a little bit of work, or maybe that's how it's gonna be. A little bit, a little bit more boggy on the bottom end, and just a powerhouse on the top. Like you're saying with the way that stroke is. I don't know.
I don't know if I would say boggy. Like, it's not a bog. Like that's a fueling problem for sure. But it just doesn't light. Like, the second you squeeze the throttle, it just doesn't zip up like the 9R does. It just kind of ramps up. It's like, okay, here we go. And
yeah.
It's there were some bog issues in it though, right? From speaking of what you guys are saying, calibration is definitely going to change on this thing.
It's got to, yeah.
We've talked to a few people, and we know they're going to be busy this spring working on fuel injection calibration, clutching calibration, a lot of things on this engine. And I think it's going to come a long way. But all we can do is talk about what we rode, and what we rode just didn't really meet the bar that I had set in my mind for this.
And like you said, maybe we were thinking 900. Like everyone's asking, everyone's like, should I buy a 900 or should I buy an 858? So in our minds, maybe we're thinking, this is going to be equal to a 900. When in all reality, an 858 is a lot closer to an 850.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's what I've been kind of frustrated. I keep seeing this 858 and 9R, 858 and 9R. I'm like, well, that's not a comparison. This is Arctic Cat's new 800. That's what they brought. They don't have an 800. They have their 600, which is their new motor. Now they've built this one, which they turned into an 858. But it's not a 9R. And if you compare it to the Polaris 850, I'd say they're more on par with each other because it's an 850 motor, which is great, and that's what they've brought and put into these. But and I mean, in defense, it's funny. I'm just listening to each one of you, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, I got to defend Arctic Cat. I mean, I didn't feel like it was any worse than the older Arctic Cats. I know.
Temperature.
but it felt like an Arctic Cat. It rode a lot like the older Arctic Cats do. And I know the Arctic Cats that I've had, you got to be in the throttle, and you ride hard and fast, and you stay in the throttle. If you want to get in and out of it a lot, you're probably not going to be super happy, or it's not going to maneuver the way that you want to. And so I had to learn to ride it just a little bit different. And so maybe that like I said, maybe the expectation, the 858 in the new Catalyst platform coming from that 600 where it was a little snappier. I think everybody thought, well, we're going to have that a little bit more power. And I mean, maybe they can dial it in, like you said, with some calibrations and stuff. I mean, there's got to be some, I think all of us maybe felt a little bit like there's some work to be done. And hopefully that there is, and it'll deliver a little bit more. But like you said, it was all we had to ride, so that's kind of what we have to go off of, you know. And
so how did you, when you mentioned you had to learn to ride it a little bit differently? How did you ride it differently?
Well, it was actually Rob probably that taught me how to ride an Arctic Cat better, because years ago I kept having trouble like placing the sled where I wanted to go and doing things. He's like, well, you got to stay on the throttle. He's like, wide open, stay on the throttle. and it was just, it changed how I rode that sled. But I did have to be up in, I think, in the power, where I can get away with a little bit on like the 9R or even the Skidoo. Sometimes it's so snappy on that bottom end, I can be a little lazy. I can pick through the trees super slow if I want to, maybe be a little lazier, but seemed like on the Arctic Cat I actually had to be a little more wide open and carry a little bit more speed and be more intentional where I put the sled.
So that trait was consistent with the Ascender, and that is still with the 858 Catalyst for you?
I think for the motor, I do believe that Catalyst chassis handles better. I actually was pretty impressed, honestly. I did ride Arctic Cats for quite a few years, and I actually got really used to how they handle and how they maneuver, and I felt like it was an improvement over the old Ascender. Yeah, as far as like holding a side hill and maybe how it comes over into a side hill, and I don't know. From that standpoint, I do think I do like that Catalyst chassis. We did mention several times while we were riding, the 858 didn't feel quite as light and nimble as the 600, but you still can feel a little bit of that improvement with that chassis.
So I wonder if something that we were talking about there, where the 858 feels a little heavier, we learned at Snowshoot that there is an external steel spider, and that thing weighs a pound to, we've heard even up to 1.5 pounds more than the billet internal spider on the 600 on that clutch. And that rotating mass, I mean, I'm no Neil deGrasse Tyson, but you put 1.5 pounds of rotating steel that's this big on the outside of that clutch, it's going to affect bottom end for sure. You know, there's inertia, and it's going to slow down your ability. And I wonder if that's also rotating mass that is going to make that sled
weight.
Yeah, it's going to create weight, right? Mm-hmm. I think that might be a little what we're feeling there.
Well, another thing is all we had was electric start models up there. Mm-hmm. So that's going to add 20 pounds plus your gear on the back of the clutch, right?
Yeah, so you got the spin ring on the back of the clutch. You've got the motor and the shaft on the front end. You got the battery on the back end. Mm-hmm. The battery is probably 10 or 11 pounds. Yeah. The whole kit's probably 22 pounds for electric start. So you got 11 pounds on the nose. You got 11 pounds under the seat. That's disappointing to me. Like, they come out hitting us really hard on the Catalyst. We're going back to super lightweight. It's going to be a really lightweight platform. It's going to be lightest in the class. Here, test this one with a 22-pound starter on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That stuff makes no sense to me.
Right.
But it is what it is. That's what we rode.
Yep.
We did have, there was a development sled in there, a black one that had some stuff that the engineers were working on, so it wasn't really like a production, this is for sale type sled. But it was not electric start, right?
Right.
Shay's
and that was
Black 858.
That was the best feeling sled.
That felt great.
Of all of
them.
them.
Felt much better.
Yeah. So, and I know it wasn't electric start.
Yeah.
Yep.
To be fair, a lot of times we go to Snowshoot, these are prototype sleds, right? Mm. We're not riding production sleds when we go to these. And this happens with every manufacturer. It's not just Arctic Cat that's working bugs out. You know, this happens with Polaris, this happens with Skidoo. You ride something at Snowshoot with the prototype, and then it can have a completely different feel or run different when the production model comes out, correct?
Right.
So I think you have to be fair to Arctic Cat here. You know, they're developing this as they go. Like you said, we rode Shay sled that runs and handles better than the prototypes that we rode. So...
Yeah, and right after Snowshoot, they did come update the fuel injection mapping. I'm not sure how much that changed things. All of these things are pretty incremental. You know, generally when they test, when an OEM has to validate, you know, we were talking to Polaris years ago over at their facility in Wyoming. And they were talking about they send engineers out, and it's similar across the board, but they send engineers out and they go hit every elevation in, was it 200 or 500 foot increments?
It was minor, so
Yeah,
they
it was
could
pretty
set
small.
it perfect.
And then they validate the fuel map and adjust for that. And then they'll go from like Wyoming to Colorado and do it again. Start low, go high, and see how the map does in different snow conditions. And then they'll repeat that process until they've produced the best map they can possibly do. And I'm sure that Arctic Cat is in that stage somewhere, probably earlier on. But yeah, to your point, it can only get better, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to make it worse.
Well, you jump on that sled, and when you're on that sled and it's in between your legs, that sled still feels like one of the best feeling sleds out there when you're just standing over top of it. And when you're riding it, it feels really good.
It does. And we shot that video with Tristan, and I'll say the same thing I said in that video. This is the best Arctic Cat I've ever ridden. Like it was for an Arctic Cat, it was awesome.
Yep.
Now, if you start comparing this to Polaris and Skidoo, there's a lot of things we can start talking about, but this is by far the best Arctic Cat mountain sled I've ever ridden.
Yeah. Agreed.
Power-wise, anything else we want to touch on from the engine? You made that comment about people are comparing this to the 9R, and that's mind-boggling. What about the people comparing it to the factory turbos?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's just excitement of a new motor. Everybody likes something new, every year when sled manufacturers maybe come out with minor adjustments and changes, I feel like there's like this huge disappointment. It's like, well, different colors, one thing,
Bold colors.
Yeah, and they get, so. I mean, I think everybody excited to see, okay, we know something's coming, right? They made the 600. They got to produce more horsepower. And so I think it's exciting. But, yeah, I don't know. I feel like everybody's run away with it just a little bit. Kind of like, well, no, this cat motor that's an 858 is going to outdo the 9R and compete with the turbos. I'm like, it's not a turbo sled.
Do you think some of the hype came from the 600? Everybody's excited about the 600. It ran well. It handled great. And everybody started comparing it to 800s. So naturally,
Yeah.
Maybe.
58 comes out, and they're like, oh, this thing's going to be a turbo killer.
How many people last year, though, did you hear, and this is legit, people said that this M600 will go where the factory turbos go? Like they were saying that.
Really?
People were saying that last year.
Maybe if they're on the same trailer going to the mountains, on the same parking lot. No, just kidding. Yeah, that's
Great
crazy.
to hear it.
That is crazy.
But it's just funny. I mean, I love it. I love it when people run their mouth like that because it's just so. That's what social media is for. And this is a sport. This is a hobby. This isn't like politics or anything. Like this is the funnest thing you can do in the winter.
Yeah.
That's why why we all do it. So it's just
Yeah.
fun to sit down and talk about it and shit talk everybody. And it's so fun to read these comments. But when you start out saying, yeah, our 600 will hang with the factory turbos, then obviously the 858 has to smoke the factory turbos.
Right. We're going to ride wheelies all
Otherwise,
around the 858
otherwise you're
turbo.
telling a lie somewhere, right?
Just stretching the truth.
Talking power-wise, like I climbed those 858s up a lot of different hills for the snow conditions we had, or at snowshoot, and they climb just like the old cats. They climb like crazy.
Yep.
That track hooks up. It's got plenty of top-end power to pull that thing. And the Catalyst chassis is impressive. Like, I really like the chassis. A couple of models we had some stiff steering. And when we recorded those videos with Tristan, that was my impression, was like they're super stiff steering. But the 146 we rode on Tuesday, it handled a lot better. And they did say they found a few flaws in the steering of that 165 we rode.
Yep.
Yeah, there was just the bolt at the bottom because it's a single post steering system. That
Something
bolt or
bad
nut at the
there.
bottom was over tight.
Yeah.
So it was binding up.
Makes sense.
So it was a quick fix, and that was just like build these sleds real quick, ship them out there. Okay, we don't have enough time to throw, to go through everything again. So send them out, and oh wait, this one's got tight steering.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not something I'm going to really.
Riley made that 146 dance that day.
Yeah.
But Riley can make anything dance, I
That
think.
kid can ride. He can make anything look good. Says Arctic Cat on it.
So if you go back to Riley's first post after the athletes rode the 858, what was that, December?
Yeah.
And you could hear that engine didn't rev real quick, and people were starting to comment about that. Like this, that doesn't sound like a rippy motor. And sure enough, we get out there on it, and that's exactly how it rides. Like it's a grunter, like it grunts, but it's got torque, it's got mid-range torque, it's got top end.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been talking about the bottom end this whole time, but for those Arctic Cat fans out there, I mean, it has horsepower. I mean,
Yeah.
it's got a motor to it. But it feels more of a mid to top end motor. It's got plenty of power on top.
So where would you rank the 858 among NA snowmobile engines? So comparing it to the Polaris 850 NA, the Skidoo 850 NA, and the Arctic Cat 800. We gotta throw that in the mix. So an Alpha 800 and a Polaris 9R. So talk about where you would put this 858 in that stack.
I'd put it closer to the Polaris 850 and Skidoo 850. I think it's more in that category. I think Polaris and Skidoo have more bottom end to them, but like top end, they're comparable.
Yeah, I'd probably say the same. Yeah, definitely bottom end power is lacking, but
How do you compare it to their 800, their previous 800?
I don't know, because I always work the clutch over on my stuff to make it run better. But as far as out of the box 800 858, I would almost say the 800's got a little more bottom end to it than the 858, to be honest with you. But I feel like mid-range, top end, the 858's got it on that one.
How much does it have it by if it's got it?
If we go 1 to 10, 10 being a lot, I'd probably go 5.
Because the claims early on in the media information that the information that they put out there to the public, they threw some numbers out, right? The 858 engine package is 3 pounds lighter than the 800, and they said it has 11% more horsepower than the 800, and 11% more torque than the 800. So that's if you're just extrapolating the math real quick, which I'm horrible at, which is why I'm a journalist. that's like 15 to 20 range, like, right? If you do 10% of 160, that's 16. So it's going to be over 16.
But that's what I would have said. I would have said 10 to 15% increase in horsepower.
Yeah.
I mean, you can definitely tell
Over the 800? Yeah.
Yeah.
On the top end, I think that's right. And if you look on the graph that they sent us, the media, it's exactly how Bruce explained it. I mean, the 800 is a little bit zippier on the bottom, but then once you start getting up in the mid range, the 858 will walk away from it.
Yeah.
So it's a top end engine for sure.
Yep.
Which for mountain riding, I think, that's where the 9R comes from is make this thing have the strongest, quickest bottom end, because that's where you spend most of your time is bottom end. That's where I wish the 858 was like a 9R competitor on the bottom end, but it's not. But on the top end, it's strong. It's got a strong mid and a strong top.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And who knows, with a little clutching, it may, like I say, it can't get any worse. So, and even maybe a little bit of tuning. I'm not much into that whole little fine tuning that them Arctic Cat guys were talking about. But
So how different is the 858 they put in the catalyst versus their ZR or trail chassis?
The engine wise,
Yeah.
it's got to be the same. I'm sure the clutching is slightly different because the load is different.
yeah. And as far as that motor on a trail, that might be, them trail riders might just think that's the best thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Because this setup with the mountains, I mean, if you're just on a wide open hill and just want to hold it open, that's probably works great. But a lot of stuff we ride is in trees and
trick bottoms and
you're
everything
in and
else.
out of the throttle. That's where the 9R is so fun.
Like Ryan said, the bottom end's where we're at.
Yeah. And the Skidoo 850s feel the same way. You're in and out of the throttle, and it's so quick and responsive. Well, this one doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when on Sunday when we started riding, I started on an 858, and I rode. My plan was 858 to Skidoo 850 NA, it was a Summit Edge Adrenaline, and then back to an 858, and then to a Polaris 850 RMK, and then back to an 858, and then to the 9R, and then just keep repeating that process. So that entire day, I rode nothing but NAs, and I think the 858. The bottom end is not as responsive or strong as the 850 Polaris or the 850 Skidoo. It's and I think it honestly comes down to more of a responsive issue. It's just not as responsive. But I like the way the Polaris 850 NA and the Skidoo 850 NA feel right off the bottom. They're just there, and they're just a little stronger. The Skidoo probably is a little stronger than the Polaris.
In the 850.
And then the Polaris 850 is probably more responsive than the 858. So for me, where it's tree riding, we're always kind of on the bottom end. Those two motors outshine it there. But if you get into the mid-range, and kind of what you were talking about, you ride an Arctic Cat differently. So if you ride an Arctic Cat to where you can keep the R's up, I mean, even if you're dragging the brake a little bit, instead of letting off to slow down, you're dragging the brake to slow down, but keeping the R's up. Like, if you can keep that engine revved, keep it in the mid-range, now you got response.
Yeah.
And so I think you can adjust your riding style a little bit to make it work. But just lazy riding right off the throttle, it just didn't feel as good as the other two NAs. And the 9R, it's not even in the same range. Like that 9R,
which it shouldn't be,
built around
right?
the bottom end. No.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be to a reasonable person, but go read the comments.
Yeah, right. True. True that.
Let's see. So we're going to jump into social media questions. We posted on the SnoWest Instagram page. Ask your questions. What do you want to know about the 858? What do you want us to talk about from our test rides? We're going to jump into that in a second here. I wanted to hit on a couple things before we do that. I want to ask you guys, is the 858M the most hyped new release you've ever seen?
I'm going to say yes to a point where they introduced it at Heydays, and then we get this early media release, January?
Yeah.
So I feel like the hype just went from here to now we're just hyped. Does that make sense? Where SnowCheck, when they released the 9, bam, there it is. But I feel like long term, throughout the whole year, the 858 was the talk of the.
Yeah. So you've got
September.
From September to, I mean, you got a long stretch. So before a consumer can go buy this at a dealership, you're going to have over a year where this thing was released and hyped up and overtalked and then put out, but put out only within the family, the people that you can kind of control the message. And then it's different than any other release that I've seen. And I've been doing this for a long time. Like, you go back to the Skidoo Factory Turbo when they dropped that yellow sled in January of 2020.
Mid-season, yeah.
Mid-season, nobody knew it was coming. They invited us up to a media event, didn't tell us what they were doing. At the same time, they had these things shipping like in trucks on the way to dealerships so that you could buy them the next couple days. Nobody saw this thing coming. So they drop it, and you've got all of a sudden there's a factory turbo in the industry. Nobody knew it was coming. It wasn't released a year before on paper. It wasn't. There's pros and cons to the way Arctic Cat did it for sure. Like they've had the hype, they've had the talk of the industry for the last year.
Well, I think they even bought a year before that, because when they released the 600, everybody wondered where
that's
the
true.
800. So they almost
it'll be 2 years before.
Yeah, they almost pulled that into it too, because now all of a sudden everybody had to know something's coming, right? Yeah. And nobody ever said anything, but of course everybody starts to speculate. So for a year before they even release, you get that speculation. And maybe the only reason they could do that early in the fall was that they didn't have technically an 858 to offer, where it's a new product. I mean, otherwise you'd kind of tank your sales on. I mean, who wants to buy a sled if in September they tell you there's a new one coming next year? So
right, yeah, that's a good point. Oh, it's just kind of an interesting approach.
So ask yourself that question, where you've been in the industry long, was the 858 the most talked about?
I think so, because it had a 2-year window. Like definitely the most hyped sled I've ever seen as a new release, because it wasn't just like released and then the sled speaks for itself. It was all the marketing material and the hype speaks for the sled 2 years before the sled can speak for itself. That type of a deal. And I think that's where you get the comments on social media of like, that 858's going to hang with your Turbo R or your Patriot Boost. Like, it'll go anywhere those go. Like, I think that's where that comes from.
Well, and there wasn't a ton of information, actually. I mean, if it wasn't for guys like Riley and Dave and some of these guys that are putting out information, there wasn't a lot of. We kept saying that. We're like, where's the media? People are asking questions like, what does it have? Like, they said we've got a new 858, and then it was kind of just left at that. So I think that speculation kind of kept going. People are like, what's the horsepower? Mm-hmm. And there's no answer, other than then you can see Riley riding wheelies and Dave riding wheelies. And
well, and their strategy worked to their advantage. I mean, they sold
Yeah.
out of the M600 in a very short period of time, like a few hours.
Nice.
The capacity to build a lot, that I don't know what they could build, but they sold out of those spring orders pretty quick. I think the 858 is not going as slow, but they can also build more of them. So the second question, follow up to that, is does the 858 live up to that hype now that you've ridden it?
Not fully. Not fully. I don't know.
I think the hype around the sled is awesome. It's, as a snowmobile consumer, like, that's what you want. You want something to get excited about and talk about with your buddies in the garage. I think before we got on it, our expectation was up here. We rode the 600 Catalyst, and it was awesome. I really enjoyed it for a 600. It wasn't competing with 850s and turbos like was talked about, but I think our expectation for the 858 after riding that 600 was pretty high. Then, overall impression to begin with after a few days, I don't think the expectation was here. I think once we rode it, it was down a little bit. I think they're onto something. I think it, like you said, it's the best Arctic Cat you've ever ridden. I think there's huge potential with it.
I think our expectations, and I know mine were, they were too high. They really were. I mean,
so we bought into the hype too.
We bought into the hype. We read the social media. We bought into the hype, and like we're all saying, it's the best Arctic Cat that we've ridden, and it's the best 850 class Arctic Cat that they've come out with. So
I guess close.
yeah, it's right there with the 850s.
Okay, so let me throw this out there then. If Arctic Cat did not throw any of this stuff out ahead of time and we just showed up sometime this season to an event and they said, boom, here's an 858, go ride it. And then we rode what we rode, what would your reaction be? How would it be different than riding it after a year and a half of hype?
Had we rode the 6 before?
Yeah. But if they didn't say anything about the 858 last fall and they just kept the lid on it.
Called us up and said, here, come ride this sled?
Yeah, just did an event and we went out and rode the exact same thing that we rode, but you just eliminate that hype.
I think I'd have the same impression, just excited that they built a new motor rather than just a 600. I don't think the impression would be any different than anticipating something.
Because of how it felt?
Yeah.
How it ran?
After riding it, I think your impression would still be the same.
Yeah.
Just the expectation wouldn't be so high. It's just right there.
Right.
That was cool about that when Skidoo released that 2020 and a half, that turbo. I mean, I thought that was awesome that they did that. Nobody was expecting it. And you could go to the dealer and buy one. Like, was it within a week or 2 weeks of that?
Within
release?
a week, yeah. Within a week, they were in dealerships.
And, I mean, that created its own hype. Then once people rode it, I mean, their impressions, I know my impression after riding it was sky high. That thing was so fun. So,
all right. One last question before we jump into the social media questions, because I know this is not in any of those questions. So we already talked about, we test rode electric start M858s. Did any of you pull start the 858?
Yeah, my shoulder still hurts.
Talk about that, Bruce, before I get into it.
So I don't know, you get on Arctic Cat, you don't think you got an electric start, which the one I got on first had an electric start, but after I pulled my back and twisted my shoulder, then I found out. But it's got a lot of compression. It's a pull for sure, and I joke about this, but it's a true, Arctic Cat's a 2-pole start motor. Mm-hmm. They've been like that forever. Once in a while, if you get lucky, you get it on the first pull, but to pull that stuff, that rope twice, my first thought was like, I'm not dissing ladies or little kids, but there's no way they're starting that. It's a pull.
Pull.
So you can't just, and some of it, I think, I think it was the Polaris rep. He's like, look where their handle is. You've got to bend over to get our handle. So your angle of, all this stuff, but to pull ours, you're bent over to pull. Here you're standing up. So your angle on your pull rope is different, which makes sense.
Well, and you got a foot more pull on the Polaris.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You got to bend down to grab it. So, but yeah, it's a pull. Like that almost to where I'm like, if I get one, I'm getting electric start.
And it's a 2-pole. Like
And it's a 2-pole.
Most 95% of the time, you're 2-pole.
Because to pull that when you're stuck or something like that and tired,
You mentioned
I'm calling Rhett.
You mentioned the 2-pole thing, so I quit hitting the button, and I'm like, I'm going to see, if this is legit. And you shut it off, pull it once, it doesn't fire. Pull it second time, it fires. So I did it a few times. Then I pulled up next to Dave. I said, "Do you always have to pull this thing twice to get it to start?" He said, "Not if you're a pansy." So he grabs the pull start.
Pansy though?
A different word.
I was trying to get that soundbite on here so we could play Dave's quote, but
He said, "Not if you're a pansy." So he pulls the rope really hard and it doesn't fire. And I said, "Well, I guess you explained that."
That's funny.
That's 2 poles for Dave McClure also.
does
Yeah.
it really make you consider going to an electric start?
It did me, for sure.
So you would take a 22-pound weight penalty because of how hard it is to pull start.
Yeah, I'm old, for one. I get tired quicker. And usually I'm in some deep tree well or something trying to pull the rope on my side. But, I mean, you can always buy a lighter battery and save a few pounds there, But
You've been riding skidoos more this year. You got used to the shot start.
I know. And whenever I get on a Polaris, I'm hoping that yellow button starts it too, but it don't.
One of these years, you
know.
just keep pushing it.
What's you guys' thoughts on the pull?
I wouldn't do an electric start. So
You're tougher than I am.
I just keep pulling.
I just wouldn't shut the sled off.
Yeah.
Because I was riding the thing all day, and I was pull starting it every single time. And their guys would roll up and be like, it has electric start. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm not going to buy one electric start, so I want to know what it feels like to pull start this thing all day. So I was pulling that rope, and every time you shut it off, two pulls, and it's not an easy 2 pulls. And, it's the whole sales pitch for shot thing. Like, yeah, by the end of the day, I spent a ton of calories on trying to start that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, the angle of the dangle is not right to pull that thing.
No, it's not. And I agree with Justin. There's no way in hell I'm buying an electric start snowmobile.
Yeah.
Like all the years I've preached lightweight.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
You
I am
can't.
Well, now you got technically what the lightest weight is what they're claiming, and you're going to keep 22 pounds on it. So, I don't know.
Yeah, but if you're not interested in pulling a manly rope pull, like get an electric start, I guess.
Yeah, start lifting weights.
Probably why they
Why they
ordered
sent them
all
out.
these with electric
Probably why they
start.
sent the media ones out as electric starts.
But yeah. Okay, let's take a pause here for a second, and we will jump into consumer questions. Do a little Q&A session on here.
Sweet.